Welcome back. So it was a sixth round victory for Anthony Joshua over Jake Paul on Saturday night in Miami. In truth, it was a slog. Joshua struggling to pin his opponent down in the early rounds, but then a huge right hand in the sixth eventually ended the contest. As you'll have seen, Jake Paul had to go to hospital. He required surgery. He had broken his jaw in two separate places. So that was about the sum of Saturday night. Very happy to say that Alex Pattle, who is combat sports editor of the London Independent, is with us on the line. Alex, how are you doing?
I'm good, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Your expectations of this fight, did they align perfectly with what the reality actually was on Saturday?
I wouldn't say perfectly. I wrote beforehand and said to a lot of people that after the fight there would be a lot of I told you so's. Whether it was an early knockout, a slightly later one, whether it went the distance. And I really don't believe anyone knew for sure how it would play out. And I think if they were telling you they did, I think they were lying. That said, I think there were certain clues, like the revelation on quite short notice of it being a bigger than usual ring. Certain things that made some of us think, okay, Jake might be able to kind of, hang on for a few rounds, and he literally did hang on in many moments. But yeah, I mean, Joshua getting the finish, I do think was an inevitability. Everything before that was, I don't think I can specifically say exactly what I expected.
Yeah. What was Jake Paul's approach to this fight?
Well, like I said, slightly bigger than usual ring. Joshua has largely fought in 20 by 20 foot rings. That's quite standard. This was 22 by 22, which might sound like it's not going to make a massive difference, but, it's harder to pin someone down. As you mentioned there, it's harder to, I know Joshua got a bit of criticism for struggling to cut off the ring properly and corner Paul, but it's harder when there's more space. And I think Paul lent into that. I think Paul was keen to try and skip away, at times quite literally run away. Being a bit of a shorter guy as well, when you can duck into space, it's hard for Joshua to land clean. Again, I know some people will sort of raise eyebrows at that and say Joshua should be able to find the shot early anyway, but it's not always that simple. And then there was, as I mentioned before, Jake sort of diving at Joshua's legs. I think that was the most frustrating part of what Jake did, right? He was diving at Joshua's legs. If there was any sort of hint of contact, he'd fall to his knees, not to the point it was a knockdown, but just to buy time and avoid damage. And truthfully, in many other fights, a ref is docking a point for that or disqualifying a fighter for that. So he kind of got away with that,
Yeah, that's the thing. I can't also quite work out, the conclusion of this, even in hindsight, like what way to kind of describe this, Anthony Joshua win. Like, are we looking at the double jaw break, and we're looking at, what he did to Jake Paul's face and using that as evidence to say, well, this is clearly why everybody expected there to be an enormous gulf between these two fighters. But then on the other side, it took 6 slogs of rounds really to get to that point. So I don't know, like was the chasm that we expected to be there as big as we all expected it to be beforehand?
I really do understand the question why you ask it, because AJ, by his own admission, he said he had to be better than he was. He was disappointed in his own performance. He admitted afterwards that they'd largely trained and sparred as if the opponent was going to fight. So by that logic, it makes sense that it was harder to pin down Jake. As I said before, it's not that I expected Jake to be diving at his legs. I thought that was farcical, but I also am a bit surprised that Joshua maybe didn't work more on preparing for a fight that was going to be about, finding someone elusive. But yeah, to your general point, I think it falls in this weird spot, right? I think people were prepared for Joshua to either stop Jake really early, and everyone out there who hates Jake, can thank the Lord that Jake was done quickly. That's what a lot of people want to see, because a lot of people really don't like Jake Paul. And like I said, I really didn't know exactly what it would look like, but I just kind of always had this gut feeling that the image people wanted of Jake Paul on his back looking up at the lights was just too good to be true. Again, not for me. It doesn't bother me what happens, but for those people who are really craving that. So it falls in this weird spot of, well, we didn't get that. He did get his jaw broken, and people are kind of trying to celebrate that if they don't like Jake. Jake's Instagram profile picture is the knockout photo. And that kind of points to this, right? People wanted Jake sort of erased from this boxing ecosystem. And the truth is that unless he was really, truly put out cold, he was always going to find a way to claim some sort of victory or to take it on the chin, no pun intended. You know, like with the profile picture, he's leaning into it. He's celebrating the fact he got in there with a massive puncher and took some damage and showed bravery and whatnot. I hope that makes some degree of sense.
It does, and I think maybe that image is exactly what a lot of people wanted, and it kind of sums up exactly what this whole foray into boxing has been. At its heart, it is a stunt. It is look how crazy I can be as a human being. Look how far I've pushed the boat out in terms of our own society. I've actually shared a ring with a former world champion heavyweight. So all that sort of stuff makes sense. What really kind of doesn't make sense to me overly is just the appetite from Anthony Joshua. And look, I suppose you could explain that with the amount of money that he received for this. But this was not an evening where the legacy of Anthony Joshua was enhanced in any way, shape or form.
No, you're right. It wasn't. I think there was a lot of talk beforehand about whether he would almost be, detracting from his own legacy, actively detracting from it by doing this. And I think there are some people out there who really do feel that just by taking the fight, he did that. And as you say, whether he did or didn't, he certainly didn't enhance his legacy. I have a feeling that some of this is tied to the fury of it all. This still looming idea that we might get to see him fight Tyson Fury, and I think at this point, the age that they're both at, I feel bad saying the wrong side of 35. It's obviously a lovely young age, but in sporting terms and in boxing terms, I just think we've been close enough to that fight before, and it's always eluded us that I can't help but feel that part of this is now, any fights they do take before, the kind of potential fight they have next year. Turki Al-Sheikh, the Saudi boxing sort of chief, has said it or hinted it will be next September. They're both expected to fight once before then, as in not factoring in the Jake Paul fight. I think they just they're trying to be careful. Joshua has already been linked to a possible fight with Rico Verhoeven, who is a kickboxing legend, who just left the promotion that he was in. But that kind of tells you, right, that maybe Joshua is kind of happy, or those around Joshua are happy for him to stay in this lane in the short term. Let's not take too many risks, and let's not lose that big fight with Fury if it can finally be made.
Yeah, and the thing is, when you're putting these two guys in the ring at this point, given that we've seen Tyson Fury, come out of retirement in the past, come out of long gaps away in the past, and done so pretty successfully, Anthony Joshua's already shown what it's like to take a bit of a break, come back, and just not get anywhere close to the level that we knew from his past. So, I don't know. Are you all of a sudden looking at Joshua versus Fury not only as something where both of these legends are past their peak, and some would argue maybe legend is too strong a word for Anthony Joshua, but is there a chance that actually Tyson Fury is just so much superior to Anthony Joshua in 2026?
You know what? It's so. First of all, yeah. Look, they're both past their peak at this point. I think the more important thing for Fury versus Joshua, as the years have gone by, to me, and I think to a lot of people kind of embedded in boxing, is that we want it to be as close to a level playing field as possible. And yeah, look, no one would dispute that Fury is the more technically proficient boxer. He's always had that advantage, right? And Joshua's advantage between the pair has always been the knockout power. And I think there have been moments over the last, 7-8 years since this fight was sort of first mentioned, in which it seemed like a really enticing matchup. It then swung one way and the other. There have been times where we've probably thought, well, do we believe Joshua could beat Fury? Probably not. There have been times over the years where I said, look, I can live without this now. Like it seems like it's not worth the hassle. And then something happens like Fury getting dropped by Ngannou and boxing awfully for the best part of, 10 rounds 2 years ago, and Joshua completely starching Ngannou 5 months later, and you start to question it. So I think yes, Fury's the better boxer. I still think there are ways you can sell the fight, and I think, as I say, it comes down more to how believable that is. And I was watching a video about it earlier on today, you know, a guy sort of debating this, and you look at the comment section, every other comment is a different way around. Fury will school him. AJ is going to knock him out. Fury will school him. There are enough people, I think, out there. I appreciate that's a small sample size, but I do think it reflects the bigger debate around AJ Fury and who would win.
Sorry, and where is this going to happen next year? It's Riyadh season, but is it in London or is it in Saudi?
It's up in the air. I mean, again, I don't even want to say like it is going to happen 100%.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's been suggested that maybe Fury and Joshua could each fight respectively in Saudi Arabia in early 2026. Maybe on the same event, maybe not. But with September being the rumored date that they would square off, it's really up in the air. I mean, the Saudis don't tend to stage September events out there. They tend to have sort of specific slots in certain months that they like. So that maybe makes me think it could be in London, it could be at Wembley or Tottenham. Obviously, they like to go to. But I will say, you know, the Saudis. I think something that might be different this time is that the Saudis hate Jake Paul and what he stands for in boxing, and I understand that AJ was offered several potential fights to try to stop him from fighting Jake Paul. That obviously didn't work. And it does make me think the Saudis will come back with somewhat of a vengeance to try and, you know, wash the taste out of people's mouths almost and finally get Joshua Fury over the line.
What specifically annoys the Saudis about Jake Paul? I mean, there's a lot of things that would annoy any right-thinking individual about Jake Paul, I would suspect. But the question I'm asking more so is there does it go beyond the obvious here, where actually this guy is paying so much? Like, I mean, clearly there was a financial incentive here for Joshua to take this fight as opposed to fighting in Saudi. So are they looking at the size of this guy's spending capabilities and actually getting a little bit of envy on that front?
I think that's a good point, a good question. I think the finances is part of it. I mean, like with Jake having this connection to Netflix, like through Netflix, he has found himself in a position where his fights can make the sort of money and his opponents can get the sort of purses that only Saudi can match. But you know, I think the Saudis had some involvement in boxing, you know, 6 7 years ago, but a different sort of group as we know it came in 2 years ago, and that is what we think of when we think of like this Saudi boxing drive. It's been the last 2 years. It's Al Sheikh and co, and they've really tried to deliver the matchups that boxing fans really want. So I have people texting me overnight, Friday into Saturday, if this is where boxing is, it's on its knees. And then I kind of saying, well, this isn't really where boxing is. Like the Saudis have given fans a lot of the like 50-50 matchups they want. Now, this is, by the way, to say nothing of the problems around Saudi involvement in boxing, in sport, you know, accusations of sports washing and their human rights record. And I don't want to overlook that in any way. But they've tried to give fans the matchups they want. And then you've got Jake Paul, who is kind of undermining that by leaning into the other side of boxing that appeals less to hardcore fans, more to casual fans. Oh, we don't care about, you know, Bivol and Beterbiev, two of the best fighters in the world who don't speak great English, aren't particularly extroverted. We care about, oh, can we see Jake Paul get knocked out? What will happen if Mike Tyson gets in? So I think it's more of a that they have an issue with Jake Paul's version of boxing, and there probably is an element of frustration that actually he's one of the few people, one way or another, who's been able to challenge them in the financial aspect.
Do we have a sense of what sort of records were broken on Saturday night in terms of Netflix and viewers? I presume it wasn't on the same level as the Tyson fight.
No, from what I understand, not quite. Although they reported similar
Right.
figures, which kind of shocked me because with Tyson, obviously there was the generational element, you know, and it really brought a lot of people together. Yeah, so not as far off as you would think from the Netflix perspective, but they only seem kind of interested in these types of fights. They did bring us Canelo Crawford in September, but actually that was an example of Turki Al Sheikh being involved with Netflix, and that was a fight that came together because the Saudis offered Canelo enough money to steal him away from fighting Jake Paul. He was very close to signing a contract to fight Jake Paul, so that kind of gives you an idea of where Netflix is at, what they're looking for. and as you say, like they're looking to break records if they can or close to it.
Yeah. So where does the circus pull up to next? What is the next step here for Paul?
You know what? It's a really good question. As I said earlier, I think people have this idea that, or hadn't a hope that Joshua would put an end to Paul's involvement in boxing. I don't think it's the case. I think he's going to lean on, like I said, what he might argue is a moral victory, or the fact that he made it X number of rounds and that he wasn't knocked out cold, etc. There's not really been much talk yet of who he could fight next, but that Canelo fight is one he's said for years he wanted, even before Jake Paul came up. And once Canelo's deal with the Saudis runs out, which is probably about a year from now, Canelo would be late 30s, and he might fancy his chances. Obviously he'll fancy his chances against Jake Paul, but he might think, well, I got the Saudi money for a couple of years, a reported $100 million deal, and now I'll try and get the Jake Paul money as well, and sort of have his cake and eat it. That's one way this could go.
Yeah. And Jake Paul will be just coming into his prime. It's all set up nicely for him.
Exactly. He's the right side of 35.
Yeah. Listen, Alex, great stuff. Thanks a million for joining us this evening.
Thank you.